Okay, we are here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia with Councilmember David O. Councilmember, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. Good to see both you and Denise.
So, Councilman, the first thing I'd like to ask you about, you put up a bill that would help create an elected school board. Where are we with that bill, and is it going to have a hearing anytime soon?
So yeah, I introduced a bill that would create a majority elected school board. For your listeners, I'd like to say that, Philadelphia is the largest school district in Pennsylvania, 10 times larger than the next largest school district. It's a very large school district. And it is the only school district that does not have taxing ability, and it is not elected. All other school districts in Philadelphia, the school board members are elected. But here in Philadelphia, they are appointed by the mayor and now confirmed by council. And that's always been the case. Sometimes I hear people say, like, we used to have an elected school board. No, we never had an elected school board since the creation of this school board and before. We're talking early 1900s. It's always been an appointed school board. But I believe that people are very frustrated with the school board. It seems to be very difficult to communicate to. Many of the things it does seems to be a surprise, not only to parents and students and the community, but also to me. I am on city council, I'm on the education committee, and I read in the paper, things that are just very dramatic that it does without explanation, without evidence, without data. And this has been kind of ongoing. And one of the things that people do know that has been one of the biggest problems in our city is that public education is something that everyone has a right to. It is guaranteed by the Constitution. And the Constitution requires equal education. That means every child should have the same opportunities in every school. And if there are specialty schools, that it should be available to them. But Philadelphia, a city of neighborhoods, is very well known to have very unfair, unequal public schools, just visibly so. And there is no good reason for that. I think it is a mistake to believe that this is the way things should be. Schools should be like post offices. Every post office is about the same service, same look, same abilities. Every school should be the same. And the fact that it isn't, I don't think is related to just a simple lack of resources. I think it's a lack of accountability. Yes, we always need more resources, but we need more transparency. We need accountability. We need better management. And I think, given the history of schools in Philadelphia, that letting people elect a person from their area, being 1/5 of Philadelphia, to know who that person is, to elect that person, who will then be responsible with the other 8 members of the school board for the entire city's education, but accountable to those voters. I think that is something that would improve accountability to the public and therefore the quality of education.
Okay. Switching gears a little bit here, the city is going to receive $1.4 billion from the federal government in 2 installments, 700 million, 700 million. And speaking with the administration, they've told us they intend to use those funds to fill budget holes. Do you agree with that approach, or are there other ways we could be using those funds for long-term investment?
Yeah, I disagree with that approach. I think that is not what this money is for. COVID-19 has really harmed our economy. One, it has to do with the virus itself and the response to the virus. The other is that it has produced other problems and other opportunities in the global marketplace. And one of the answers to the virus and the changes lies in technology. In order to ensure that people feel safe from the virus, safe from crime, that they are able to travel to the city, that they are able to gather together, that they do not have to work at home, that they can come to events and conventions and meetings and network within our city and have the cultural and artistic experiences that they want, go to our universities, innovate, collaborate. We can use that money to ensure that our city is ahead of these changes, ahead of the curve. But simply filling holes, it does not generate revenue. We still have people that are unemployed. We have people that are unable to work. We have businesses that are no longer functioning. We have not addressed, what will be probably, continuous variants of COVID-19. And I think there's things that we should be doing. So we can plug holes, but there are more holes coming. We do have to adapt to this environment and get people back to work and figure out how we're going to take advantage of the detrimental situation that has impacted the global economy. And I think that's what that money should be used for.
Is there any kind of specific programming, anything you would point to that you think would be a good use of those funds?
Yeah, one I think is that we have ways to ensure that public gathering places are generally safe from the COVID-19 viruses and its variants. That technology is important. And some of it, I think, should be required. Some people don't have a choice. If they're in a hospital, if they're in a detention center or in our prisons. Other people, they if they're going to ride public transportation, or if they're going to go to a convention, our convention center, those should be safe. I think that we cannot avoid the fact that, people feel that Philadelphia is unsafe. They don't want to ride regional rail. They don't want to ride public transportation. Many people have no choice. People don't even want to stand at a bus stop. People are worried about their children playing basketball or going out at night. I mean, public safety is critically important to the quality of life of this city. And that involves, people and how they live, how they interact, but also whether people come into this city, do business, go to restaurants, meet and gather. I think, for example, that, we should have our top people looking at the changes in the worldwide economy and figure out how we're going to be competitive. I think that the creative arts economy is one of the places where we can really do well, and where a lot of our folks who, they're very tremendously talented, but they don't have a platform, but now they don't have an audience. They don't have a stage. They don't have an ability to get their music and their videos and their writings out the way they should. Live performance spots are have been really decimated by all of this, and with that, the gig workers and everyone who relies on that. And beyond the work itself, it has to do with the sense of hopelessness. People aspire to be somebody. They have a desire, to want to express themselves and be the very best person they can. The challenge of our city is to make this city the place where you can do it, so that the people who live here have a hopeful future, that people around us come into our city, and that we become a destination point for people who do that. I mean, I had proposed during one of our budget processes that we take $45 million and create an arts recovery fund, because the numbers tell us how many people are uplifted by that, how many people are willing to work hard for that, how many people might not have an opportunity otherwise. And, for your listeners, it's it's $3.4 billion in economic impact on an annual basis. It's $930 million in household income, and it's $157 million in local taxes. So the challenge that we have is that while we very much appreciate eds and meds, we do not, as a government, appreciate the creative arts economy, arts and culture. We say we do, and we recognize the numbers of impact, but basically our arts and culture budget as a city is 4.2 million, and that's been cut to 3.4 million. So it's an $800,000 cut. And I think it is grossly misrepresented as like an increase in arts funding, the way it's spun out, the way it's been conveyed in the media. It's not an increase, it's a sharp decrease. And, you know, when you compare it to other cities like Chicago that instituted a $60 million arts recovery fund, New York and their budget, which is over $100 million. You know, when you look at who's working, who's not getting themselves involved in criminal activity because they believe that they can become the person they want to become, you know, and all these other opportunities. I think there are many, many reasons why this city should be investing in the restoration and the expansion of the arts economy. Finally, I'd like to say, you know, when you get on Netflix, as we all do, or Amazon these days, you have got so many foreign films. You know, in my day, I went to the video store, and you might find a back shelf of foreign films, right? You don't have much of a selection. Young people today, they just naturally have a selection, and they are used to watching films and TV shows in all different languages and all kinds of things. In the middle of COVID, when we were not producing television and movies in America, Netflix announced they were investing $500 million into Korean TV shows and films. You know, the technology, the safety, how to do that. Look at K-pop, BTS. You know, these are things that, you know, not too long ago, they were not really as impactful in Korea as they are today. You know, several things happened in the US, you know, Napster and all that, that did not impact, for example, South Korea. And they have the money, and now they are a global phenomenon. But that has as much to do with our failings as it has to do with their abilities. And so for us, we sit on some very, very talented people, which I'm making a statement of fact, not opinion, as shown by all the Philadelphians that are, you know, tremendously involved in many areas of the creative arts economy. But it is difficult for them to get ahead here in Philadelphia. And when they become successful, they rarely come back to our cities, and they do express that. But, you know, it is something that we can and should do. I am now working with the state, by the way. You know, my bill was defeated, along with the restoration of the arts funding. And I have gone to the state, and I hope the state will fund this creative arts economy, you know, recovery fund.
And not to get too far off topic, but I talk about this regularly, actually. There was a hearing that you held before the pandemic. I believe it was mostly with people who make clothing.
Fashion, fashion industry task force.
It was the biggest, the most attended committee hearing I'd ever been to. And I remember speaking to some of the people who, there were issues with taxes and making their clothing, I think, in Allentown, and then bringing it here. They wanted to make it here. And they told me that what they could do is design the clothing and take Philadelphians, train them on the sewing, and they could have jobs. Yes. And I thought, geez, that's perfect. You know, how can we do more of that? So what you're saying is fundamentally important and creates not just one job, but could have a ripple effect.
Yeah, economic engines. In other words, when you look at that hearing, there's a diversity of people gender, race, all kinds of different people at various levels of the fashion industry. And what happens is there's urban fashion, there's high fashion, there's small batch manufacturing. But what's happening in New York is the fashion folks are leaving and they're looking, where to go. And one of the problems we have in our city is our $4.2 million in money for arts and culture is primarily nonprofit organizations that serve the public, and that's wonderful. And so for every dollar we give them, they serve people in the neighborhood, and they help with music education and art training education, not training, art education, things for kids to do, and things like that, dance groups, all those type of things. But it's nonprofit. Other than that, the city sometimes will support like the orchestra, which is valuable to our city as an international ambassador, the ballet, things like that. What is missing is we do not support our residents and community members in creating jobs and paying themselves and becoming economically self-sustaining, or doing urban fashion or those type of things. And we are not incentivizing these manufacturers to do what you said. Base yourself in Philadelphia, train people, give them a high skill, let them get paid, put food on the table. And a lot of our folks, they aspire to be like Jay-Z or Beyonce. They are not in it for the money per se, but they are not looking to be poor either. They are looking to be the best artist they can, the most successful, the fame and everything else that comes with it. It's very competitive. There's no net. But if you're going to tell them that we only fund you if you do it for free, or we're not going to fund you if you're trying to make money, that becomes to me a big problem. And that's one of the things we deal with when we talk about our failings in education, in job training, what's the outlook for, our economic future that's meaningful to the people in our city who need it the most. I mean, I wish more young people were interested in, being a plumber or something. And folks always say we can't get young people up to our training center. And I understand, I wish they would, but you know what? You're not going to make young people do something they don't want to do. But if you put music and video and fashion in front of them, they love it. They get engaged. They look at the technology. They want to, learn about it. And they get involved in more schooling, and they have a profession. They are developing themselves, and it's a great way to do it. And yeah, there are many opportunities that don't necessarily mean you're in front of the camera or that you're behind the microphone, but you're involved in many different ways. And the creative arts economy is a very big platform, and it involves many indirect jobs that are very well paying. I just always like to point out that a Teamster driving a movie to production vehicle, can make up to $150,000 a year, which is tremendous, right? So there's a lot that comes with that. And a lot of Philadelphia is based on tourism. And if someone is going to give you a $1 tip or a $20 tip, it makes a big difference to you. But it's also the fact that people who have more money than they need, that want to come in and are willing to spend that money, will pay you for your skills and ability, your innovation, your ideas, your art and everything else. And that's a good ecosystem for us. So yeah, I mean, I think the Fashion Task Force, which by the way is going to have a hearing on their report coming up, I think that's one of many things that we can do. And by the way, I mean, the founders of Philly Fashion Week and the drivers of a lot of this are two African-American men who encompass, a very diverse group of people, universities and all kind of things, really just based on the merits. And so it's a wonderful group of people all interacting on their abilities, their arts, and their common love of fashion and everything related to it.
I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on WPPM 106.5.
Oops, you're on mute.
Hi, Councilman. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Same here. Same here. I wanted to go back a little bit to the school board question for a minute.
Yes.
Um, would it be the entire school board elected? And if so, how do you keep money? Because you're going to need money to run. How do you keep money from taking what is already going to be a contentious process and bumping it up to the nth degree? Because I used to cover suburban school districts that had elected school boards, and it was a mess.
Yes. So one of the differences between Philadelphia and those suburban school districts is that Philadelphia schools are funded through the property tax. And they get basically, let's say, half the property tax goes to the schools and half go to the city. The schools cannot increase or decrease their portion. Only city council can do that. And typically, city council puts in additional money to fund our schools. On top of that, we also have a cigarette tax because the state would not give us money, but they did give us permission to basically tax cigarettes and use that for education. But I think one of the things that happens is that with 9 school board members, none of them being elected, we have a lack of transparency and accountability to the public, including city council, which despite the fact we give them hundreds of millions of dollars, we don't actually have any ability to make them do anything. And that becomes frustrating to the community when they look at like schools where, they just find it so under resourced. And the result has been we've ended up with charter schools. And now there's a new policy put in place by the school district where you can no longer go to the charter school of your choice. You have to go to, in other words, the charter schools are now limited to catchment areas, which changes the nature of charter schools and changes the opportunities that people have in the community because it's basically a lottery system. And so instead of just applying to every possible charter school and hoping to hit the lottery, because there's no other selection process, you're limited to your catchment area. But if we had good quality neighborhood schools, that might not have been where we've ended up. People are expressing themselves by what they choose to do. And there is a lack of charter schools because people want more than what is in their neighborhood. I do think that the mayor is very important to the Philadelphia education. And the way that is right now, the mayor nominates 9 members and then council confirms them. But who do these school board members answer to? I do think it will be much better for the people if they could identify that one individual who went before them and got elected. But it still leaves the mayor with 4 people that the mayor can appoint. And I do think that one of the reasons why the appointment process should be a good process and can be a good process is because many very capable people, especially those who are very accomplished in their fields, do not want to subject themselves to the election process. It can be a very nasty process. It has a lot to do with who's backing you, those type of things, and they rather not do it. I do think that if the mayor were to appoint really well qualified people, then I think this would not be a problem. But the credibility of the school district has been, at times, shaky, and at times, just a complete lack of confidence. And I think that giving people some input and say into who is going to respond to them, explain why, for example, these schools in their neighborhood are in such poor condition, why the library doors are locked, why the bathrooms are locked, why there isn't drinkable water, all those type of things. I think that is a level of responsiveness people need, and certainly something that I would like to see. I think when it comes to how the money is divided, that is very difficult for me because I don't know where the money is being used, and I cannot get an answer under these circumstances. And if that's troubling for me, it's troubling for the average person out there. I will finally say that, for example, one of the things that I try to do is I've tried to take back the funds of on-street parking and control of on-street parking, which the Philadelphia Parking Authority has taken over in order to fund the schools, which it has not done. It was taken over expressly because the state said, we are now responsible for funding Philadelphia schools, and we need $45 million a year to do it, and we don't have the money, so we're seizing the Philadelphia Parking Authority to fill this state need, and that has never been done. And to me, the seizure is illegal, and I did introduce a bill. It has not passed. I hope that it will pass. I believe there is basically the $45 million per year there for schools. And that is before the parking authority expanded itself and consumed internally the funds. And up until, COVID-19, it was a much larger entity spending a lot more money. Some will say wastefully. But again, I can't tell what's going in there, although I did a resolution for an audit, and there was an audit done by the Auditor General on behalf of the Attorney General. I think the Controller's done one. But one of the problems is to understand how the parking authority is consuming the money that is supposed to deliver to the city. What I mean is, if it is going to lease a parking facility for a year, it leases it for 10 years, pays everything up front, and then gets another lease. What is the burn rate of money when it is not their money, when it is money that is supposed to go to the children of the school? Because as much as people may want to go protest in Harrisburg, this was our money. This is supposed to be our money, and it's not. And so why don't we, take this, pass a bill, and if they want to challenge us, they can. But I've pointed out the legal opinions and other things which say that basically the language of the legislation does not preclude city council from passing laws, which basically we can do. We used to have a cooperation agreement between the city and the parking authority. That no longer exists. And I think it's not so much that we're going to assume the function of the parking authority as much as it is to get back a cooperation agreement and a level of understanding of where this money goes. Finally, I'd like to say that once the state took over the school district, the parking authority to fund the school district, it then created separate functions and separate accounts where the money goes directly to the state. And from there, where does it go? We do know that that money goes around the rest of the state to fund things in other counties. And therefore, there's a reason why the state legislature likes, this system, the money from Philadelphia that ends up funding, things all across the state, but it's not funding our schools.
Okay. Now, you also talked a little bit about the arts and the creative economy. And right now, everybody is really crazy about Abbott Elementary. And that's a show that's set in Philadelphia with the schools and stuff. Would what you're proposing kind of act as an incubator for for that kind of creativity? And have you talked about maybe partnering with one of the colleges on that? I'm a Temple grad. We have a very good School of Communications and Theater that you could partner with.
Yeah, I do like those type of things. I will say, however, fundamentally, and it is not to say no. Yeah, I think it's great. I love it. And I think that's like icing on the cake. The problem is the cake, that our school system has been one where there's something special for this school, but not every other school. There's something that we could do for the one school. Like, in other words, the thing that I've found, at least in my, I had a hearing on best practices in public education on a worldwide basis, looking at many very successful public school systems, including Finland and South Korea, Austria, Germany, when it comes to the vocational, technical, things that the thing that I found is whatever school system you're in, however it is different, one thing stood out. It's equitable. A violin here, a violin there, everyone's got a violin. Chemistry here, chemistry there. Music here, music there. The schools look the same. They have the same resources, level of education, funding. Every opportunity for this child that exists in this neighborhood exists in that neighborhood. You can add to it by centering certain things that's available to every child who wants to apply for that, to be able to do something like that in certain school systems. For example, like in Finland, there are no magnet schools, there's no specialty schools, there's no private schools, everything's a public school, but you may have 3 teachers in one classroom. And by the way, every teacher has to have a master's degree and is paid for by the government. South Korea is a different system, and there you may have different schools, but the cake, the fundamental thing about education, it's equal. When I went to, I took a trip to various schools. When I first got elected, I went up to Brooklyn for the pathway schools. When I happened to be going to Korea to look at, jobs and other types of things, and by the way, K-pop, I did visit schools in Seoul. And by the way, I travel at my own expense, just so everybody knows that. But, it's funny because I said, I want to see your best and worst school. And I got like this non-response, and there was all this confusion. I got upset and I said, listen, if you come to Philadelphia, I'll show you what's supposed to be our best schools and our worst schools. Why won't you to do the same for me? And there was, so when I got there, what I understood was this: there really isn't a best and a worst school. They look the same. They smell the same. The kids look at everything like they have a little play yard. This one has a play yard. This one has a cafeteria. It's basically the same. And the idea that in Philadelphia or in America, like one school is so dramatically different from the next school, it is unthinkable. And to me, that's correct. It's not just a privilege, it's a constitutional guarantee. And we violate that constitutional guarantee every day in this city without correcting it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But, if we could get to the baseline of cleanliness, of academic and career training, of art and music, get to that level with the accountability and then add on. But we are ending up being a city where some schools, are good and they're so different because one's next to Penn, one's next to Drexel, a bunch of them aren't. This one has got a grant for this. And when we add charter schools in, there is not like a continuity of education and educational opportunity. And I think that is the fundamental problem in this city.
Okay. My last question is about the whole majority and minority setup in council.
Yes.
It used to be that you had you had the Democratic majority and you had the Republican minority, but now you have the Democratic majority, the Republican minority, and the Working Families Party, which is even more of a minority than that. So there is no quote unquote minority whip anymore. How has that made the council experience different? And how have you adjusted to that?
Yeah, so what happens in our charter in the interest of good government, our charter created mandatory, not of the majority positions. It just happened to be that there were Democrats and Republicans, but it really says you can have, for example, 5 at large from one party and no more. So 2 will be not from the majority party, like they can't be Democrats. It could be anything else. Or in the election commissioner's office, 2 from one party, the third has to be from another party. It's really kind of like a check and a balance. What happened this last time is that we had 2 at-large Republicans and 1 district council Republican. And now we have 1 at-large and 1 district, and we have 1 working families. And at the point in time that that happened, that would leave us with a minority leader, a minority whip, and nobody. So I declined to be minority whip because it just seemed a little silly to me. You know, I didn't see the value in it. I've since kind of like reconsidered based on some things that I've seen, but fundamentally, yes, we have a majority leader, we have a majority whip, and we have a majority assistant whip or deputy whip. But then, you know, there's 14 Democrats and there's only 2 Republicans, and you would have, I guess, a minority leader, and then you have a minority whip. I guess I could check with myself to see what I'm doing. Because you get a little bit of extra money for that, but I just didn't really see the purpose in it. So because I wasn't going to be minority whip, we didn't need a minority leader either. So now the unintended consequence of it, by the way, is we have a majority leader, majority whip, a majority deputy whip. Of course, our council president is Democrat, and we have nobody else. So that wasn't good either. But, you know, how it works now is that we used to have like these meetings within council where the leadership team consisted of the council president, the majority and minority leaders getting together, you know, to talk to the mayor about what he's doing and things like that. So at that point in time, I kind of felt like there was value to the position because I was at least in the room having this conversation. And if you add the numbers, that is basically 7 people. So if we come to consensus, you know, as a leadership team, we have basically 7 votes and you need 2 more to pass something. Now, there just isn't these meetings. And I think the unintended consequence is that there isn't a time to really voice different perspectives. You know, whether people agree or disagree at the end of the day, I think different perspectives is a good thing to at least bring out issues. And sometimes the majority will say, oh, you know, we didn't look at it that way, something like that. There really isn't a point where you're going to, with only 2 Republicans on council, like push your way through anything. You would have to reason or kind of express something reasonable or, hey, here's a better way of doing it. So I do think that one, that has been lost. But the other thing, which I can't tell, is because of COVID, we're just not meeting. You know, one of the problems with COVID is, you know, whenever we do something, it has to be televised, you know, because of the Sunshine Act. But the opportunity to have something televised is very limited. So it means that everything is cut short. So for example, we cannot go into like a certain department that may have a multi-billion-dollar budget. We have like 15 minutes, the 17 of us, to ask questions. And other than that, we got to put something in writing. And I think the public accountability, the public scrutiny was very important to the checks and balances. And me personally, I like the fact that people can come in and be disruptive. They don't respect our rules sometimes. They yell, you know, that's all very important because they cannot reach the mayor. They can come and sit in council and give us a piece of their mind. And I think that's one of the most important experiences I've had as a legislator. It's something that I think, you know, especially our new council members, they have not had very much of that experience. They've been in office like 2 years, but I think they've only gone to like live council sessions for like 3 months or so. I mean, basically, I think that very much tempers your little echo chamber and your little pond, you know, in being engaged with people and hearing, you know, the fact that they don't mind telling you how little they think of your ideas or your positions. I think that's very humbling and important. That being gone, I think has been, you know, I think bad for our city.
Thank you, Councilman. I'd like to take it back to Larry McGlynn.
Thank you, Denise. And Councilmember, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you both. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay well.
Thank you, sir.